Welcome and thank you for being brave to come this evening when our state is in exception, because something is going on. I don't know what is going on. It's overcrowded everywhere. So we have this evening Petar Milat. He's always exciting, although he says that he's a former philosopher. So this is why he's even more exciting. And we will see what kinds of horizons he will open this evening. Thank you, Petar, for coming.
Thank you, Iska. Okay, well, we will use the microphone, so I hope it won't be not too intimidating for you. First of all, to say that this small lecture or talk I will give tonight is a continuation of a couple of seminars, in a way, that I have given here in Skopje since the last 4 or 5 years. So, together with Iskra and within also the context of several projects we have run together. So our friends from Skopje, Zagreb, Novi Sad, Berlin, London, and so on. We have been, I would say, we have been interested in the question what learning is. We were interested in all those practices that have risen out, be it within aesthetics and arts, activism. So to tell maybe just about the context that almost all of us here in the room, I presume, have been by this or that way engaged in activist practices here in Skopje or in Zagreb and other cities. So we have been also dealing and gathering, convening together, trying to, in a way, to answer for ourselves or to articulate the question of learning and of collectives, small collectives. So in a way, what I will present you today is, for me, is a kind of recapitulation in a sort of poetics of learning, I would say, that I've tried to develop. I start just to be. I start now with a movie. I will not tell you anything now before in advance. So just it is about 7 minutes. 7 minutes long.
Je ne retournerai plus à l'école.
Pourquoi?
Parce que à l'école, on m'apprend des choses que je ne sais pas.
Tiens. Un petit brin, 9 ans, des lunettes. Fait pas grand bruit, faut dire.
Non, je ne vois pas d'Ernesto.
Personne ne le voit, n'a l'air de rien.
Amenez-le-moi.
C'est vous, Ernesto?
Exact.
En effet, je ne vous reconnais pas.
Moi, je vous reconnais.
Vous voyez le genre.
Alors, on refuse de s'instruire? Enfant Ernesto?
Exact.
Et pourquoi?
Parce que ça a duré longtemps, très longtemps.
L'instruction est obligatoire.
Pas partout.
On est ici, on est ici. Ici, on n'est pas partout.
Si.
Et lui alors? Qui c'est lui? Hein?
Un bonhomme.
Et ça? Au moins ça. Dis ce que c'est, Ernestino.
Un crime.
Et ça, c'est un ballon de football, une pomme de terre?
C'est un ballon de football, une pomme de terre et la terre.
Un crétin. Voilà ce que ce sera.
Non, faut pas t'en faire.
Mais c'est quand même triste.
Non, pas du tout.
Tu crois?
Sûr.
Étrange.
Qu'est-ce qu'on va devenir? 7, on en a 7.
Cas unique.
C'est toujours ça.
Donc nous nous trouvons devant un enfant qui ne veut apprendre que ce qu'il sait. Déjà, voilà.
J'en ai 7 et j'en ai marre.
Et comment l'enfant Ernesto envisage-t-il d'apprendre ce qu'il ne sait pas encore?
Tiens, mais c'est vrai.
En rachachant.
Qu'est-ce que c'est que ça?
Une nouvelle méthode.
Un cholant.
Comprends rien.
Père du fil.
Et que c'est déjà l'enfant Ernesto?
Rien, vous n'avez qu'à le regarder.
Puis en plus du reste, il est complètement miro.
J'ai posé une question, il me semble. Que savez-vous, enfant Ernesto?
Je sais.
Y touchez pas ou je cogne.
D'accord. Et pourquoi l'enfant Ernesto refuse-t-il d'apprendre ce qu'il ne sait pas encore? Pourquoi?
Réponds Ernesto si t'as compris.
Pourquoi?
Parce que c'est pas la peine d'apprendre.
Au fond.
Au fond du fond.
Alors comment l'enfant Ernesto saura-t-il lire, écrire, compter dans ces conditions, hein?
Je saurai.
Comment?
Inévitablement.
Faites attention à vos expressions, ou vous allez me braquer, enfant Ernesto.
Vous verrez rien, calmez-vous. Je rentre à la maison.
Alors, maintenant qu'il est parti, qu'est-ce que vous en pensez?
Comme prévu.
Mais à part ça,
Qu'est-ce qu'on va en faire? C'est-il vrai que ce sera comme un livre? Un jour, conduirait pas, boire et manger, travailler, se tromper et pas, et tout le machin.
Hélas, oui.
What we have seen is, as you have already seen, the movie by Daniel Huet and Jean-Marie Stroop from 1982, Arachachon, after a text, after a children's story, kids' story, Ah Ernesto by Marguerite Duras, 1971. And in a way, it's quite inspiring piece of cinema. In a way, comprises much of the motives, as I told you already. In a way, it is a question of learning, instruction, refusal of instruction, how to apprehend, how to learn what you know or what you don't know. But what is so striking, the moment the professor, the teacher asks little Ernestino, what his method is of apprehending, learning things, acquiring knowledge, both old or new, the little kid says, Enrachachon. Enrachachon is a new word, a neologism invented on a fly by the little kid and by Marguerite Duras. In between Enrachachon, in between recherche, to research or rabâcher, so to rehash, reuse, recycle. So Ernestino's answer is he will learn in a way by rehashing, reusing, recycling. And this is the method. Recycle again and again and again. This is the new method. This story by Duras, quite a popular one. It has then been taught also used in French elementary school, at least what I know. Interesting point is that you could guess Ernesto, Ernestino, this is a family of Italian migrants in France. And also there are at least seven of the kids in the family, so it's a rather big family. So it's become also the question, some of the points yesterday made by Maurizio Lazzarato. And the second thing I also would say that Ah Ernesto, this is the title of Marguerite Duras' short story. This is also a refrain, echo of the very last sentence in Herman Melville's Bartleby, the Scrivener. Ach, Bartleby, ach, humanity. And this is the way, as you know, Melville ends the story of a scrivener at Wall Street. So anyway, this is, I would say, everything I would like to present you tonight, in a way, would be summed up in this movie. All the questions of the method of instruction that would, in a way, be a refusal, try to go out beyond the state of affairs, of present state of affairs, and new method of research that is, in a way, just rehashing, reusing, recycling. In a way, getting to know what you already know. Let me just tell you how I will proceed. I will have a short introduction, then I will have a second part. I will come up with a kind of a poetics of classification, just very provisional classification, with Rancière, with Alfredson Rethel, Georges D. Duberman, then ending with Miriam Hanson and Christian Kier. And then for the very last part, maybe just to present you something I think would fit within of these questions within arts. In this case, for this talk, I will just maybe go into literature and into Imre Kertész. Saying so on becoming former is, and I've given the moment I have given this presentation in some other countries this year. My prime example was always that I have so many friends and I feel so domestic, local in a country that its name is a former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. So in a way, you could guess. So it's a nice point, I guess. So that we are right now, being in a country which is a former country, former republic, and that this question, as all of our local friends know, is not just a matter of nominalism, that the very name of this state or this republic we are now in the present, was and still is quite political, and this is in a way nothing innocent about a name or being a former or whatever republic. My second thing will be, why I'm interested in the notion of former is that I would say, I would also say that once I was a philosopher, so it's being a former philosopher is we're realizing that you have become something else than you thought to be. Is quite intimate and personal. So I am interested in the question of becoming former, just because in a way I left a profession or vocation I have been instructed to and socialized to become a philosopher, and then I've become something else. And then by topic, I would say this is probably the most important part of my motive of presenting you what I will present in this evening is the topic of anachronism as a prominent topic, not just within philosophical tradition, but most and probably also most interesting within specific strands of art historical research, anachronism in arts. And to come, let's say, in a way to define you just provisionally for the sake of, let's say, introducing what I think former philosopher is, former theorist probably also. I would say that, first of all, unlike a philosopher who is after conceptual and argumentative coherence, I would claim that a former philosopher theorist is a rather person, he or she, setting up a resonant environment. And I guess this is quite a difference. So it's not to care, not be taken over by the imperative of conceptual and argumentative coherence, but rather in being obsessed and being driven by setting up resonant environments. Also, former philosopher means, and presentation of a former philosopher is rather like an introduction to an imaginary exhibition. So it's a rather exhibition than a logic. Imaginary exhibition where all material displayed is on equal footing and of the same importance. This is also something one learns with living together with artists. That, of course, not just with artists, but probably with artists most prominent, is that in the way to present material also is, again, it's a rather less conceptual coherence than way setting up some kind of imaginary exhibition, that all material you present is of same importance, and there in ways no fore or background, no primary or secondary material. This I take to be important imperative as a method. And then to make let's say the most important point in what has been of my personal interest is that I would say that I have come to the topic of former or becoming former in the interest, obsession of with the topic of temporality of a form. So temporality, but not taken as it usually is. So temporality, if you think of form within philosophical tradition or within art history, a form, of course, I mean, we could claim that form is always temporal, that form in a way is always historical, that there is a inherent historicity of form, that form or forms change. I would say this is true. I mean, I won't decline from this line of thought. But what interests me is would be rather exaggerated, or case where form actually would be the most prominent form of time, or kind of time, or modus of time. So in a way, that form, again, is not just a symptom of specific historical development or temporal development, but form, in a way, is just another name for time or temporality. And changes of form then, in a way, also are changes within history. And to sum it up almost in a formula, I would then claim that form is an operation whereby some x becomes forma x. Or then more witty, say that adjective of form is not formal, but formal. Again, we know, and at least from Aristotle to Hegel, that form is the one thing that in a way precedes meta or material. Form or idea in Plato is always the one thing, the one scheme, the one sketch. You, in a way, if you want to build a house, you have to have already idea of form of house that you will build. And also, so at one point, so form is something that precedes material or process of building up something. But then also, as we know, form is also the one consequence. Once you have built a house, then what you see is a form of a house. So already there, within this most representative theory of philosophers from Aristotle to Hegel, form in a way is a temporal. And there's always this very specific temporal dimension of form related to matter or to material, or to process of constructing something. But again, I would claim, so my claim goes, it's a bit different. So I'd say, unlike form, I'd say from Aristotle to Hegel, form is the thing that in a way perfects a thing, that makes some x perfect x. My claim is another, so I would say that form, again, is an operation whereby some x becomes forma x. So in a way, is kind of deconstructed. So it's, again, not a perfection. Form is not the perfection of some material. So this is not the end point or starting point of some object, of some x. Rather, it is operation whereby some thing, some x becomes forma x. Or to come to the point of, as you know, in Ecce Homo, Nietzsche will say that his research, his method in Ecce Homo, Nietzsche says he's interested, and his genealogical method is to, in a way, to describe how one becomes what one is. So my interest is, in a way, is again also a bit different. So my interest is to, in a way, to come up with the idea of what it means to become what one was. And see that, as you will know, in 1971, Michel Foucault had this incredible article which has become so prominent, like so many of his short essays on Nietzsche, genealogy and history, and many of the motives I in a way encountered during not just preparing this presentation. Would be that Foucault probably in this article on Nietzsche and the notion of genealogy has probably most striking way he has developed notion of knowledge that really runs counter and is subversive to any epistemology of former epistemology in his context. And maybe, as you will recall, at the final stage of this short article, Foucault at some point says that knowledge is, and this genealogical knowledge as it was proposed by Nietzsche, is less of, in a way, of interpreting things, and is less of making things knowledgeable or evident, but that knowledge, as it was proposed by genealogy in Nietzsche, is cutting. So that knowledge is the one thing that makes you cut. So in a way is the knowledge, rather than being some narrative that makes our narrative's context coherent and total, knowledge is the one activity or operation whereby you cut things. You make them discontinuous. So I would say that this is probably one of the most important, and also a reference point to me. But again, unlike with Nietzsche, who again had this famous formula, how one becomes what one is, it would be interesting, and it was of interest for me to try to grip to the point of how one becomes what one already was. Very much like little Ernestino in the film, who just wants to know, to learn things and subjects he already knows. Now coming with the first operation, a formal operation within theory, I find it striking that in the recent years, Rancière, since I would claim since 2011, and his wonderful lecture on time, it's called In What Time Do We Live? This was a lecture presented at the opening of the Venice Biennale 2011, that Rancière has tried to, in a way, to come up with the let's say, with the answer, what if you take temporality or time otherwise? If you would take up temporality, if you would, in a way, skip the discussion of progression or regression, of being progressive or regressive, of how you, in a way, how you could, I mean, what it would mean to think of time otherwise. And what I find so interesting in this short article in the lecture of Rancière, Jacques there, he proposes that we think of those operations, or that the overall aim of his project is, so Rancière's project is in a way dealing or talking about time, is in a way that the product of such a research is to build small machines, dispositives. That in a way, he says, that would make it possible to other possibilities of looking at the present, to construct other possibilities of looking at the present. And there he comes up with the notion that is leaning very much, and has also been inspired by a notion of Foucault's heterotopia. As you know, again, Foucault, the one famous article from 1967 of other spaces, on heterotopia, is, and this notion introduced by and now used by Rancière is heterochronia. And as you will know, and yesterday again it was also something brought up by Maurizio in his talk, that as you will know, that there is at the very end of Foucault's famous article, there is a classification of those other spaces. So prisons, cemeteries, and probably ships. And I would say in a way that almost comparable to what Foucault has done in this short article, that in the recent years, Rancière's obsession was in a way to construe some kind of similar classification of different times that would in a way be similar to this classification that Foucault has presented in the article. But and there's an interesting point with Rancière. He says, if I'm after a classification of those other times that in a way opened up. If I want in a way to build something of it, some kind of little machine, some kind, we could say that some kind of time machine, Rancière's point would be unlike, so as we know from literature, time machine usually are used either to go back or forward in time. Time machines are in a way escapist, in a way that you try to make a travel. Time machine, or those small dispositives, temporal dispositives that Rancière is about, would be something, and this is what he says as a kind of a pinnacle of this article from 2011, is that time machine of this time machine that Rancière thinks of is a time machine that would make it possible to live in several times at once. So unlike with the time machines, let's say, of A.G. Wells, where you have a time travel either, so again, in the future or in the past, for Rancière, the true essential time machine would be some kind of machine dispositive apparatus that would allow us to live in several times at once. This is his idea of heterochrony. And what has been then interesting with Rancière, he has connected this notion of heterochronia, as it was developed in this lecture, most specific in a couple of books. For example, in Modern Times, just published last year, Rancière has connected this notion of heterochronia, of those other times, with a notion which I would say almost has become a new master signifier for Rancière, as you know. So there is mésentente, there is partage des sensibles, but now with we'd say that fiction, so the notion of fiction, and you have here the quote from Modern Times, has in a way become the new master concept of Rancière's. So in a way, what we have there is so if Jacques' proposal suggestion was in a way that we have to in a way to build those small time machines that in a way would allow us to live at once in several times, that the name for this machine for Rancière as a new kind of rationality, as he says, that the name for such a machine, time machine, is fiction. So I say that this is, let's say, this is the first characteristics of becoming formal. Is in a way is to construct, to build up machines, fictions that we are able to live in several times at once. Then, let's say for second characteristics within my small poetics, I come to Alfred Zondrettel and notion of built-in obsolescence. There's a wonderful essay by Alfred Zondrettel, who was, as you probably know, one of the almost forgotten people within the critical theory of Frankfurt type, German type. There's a wonderful essay written in 1926 about Naples, Napoli, the ideal of the broken down, des Kaputten. And Zondrettel was at that time, he was also with Benjamin and Asialatsis, he was quite often being in Naples, and he was astonished by the Neapolitan use of technology. And as you see, so in the quote, one begins to have the impression that everything is already broken before it leaves the factory. And this is something which today has become, with the notion of built-in obsolescence, almost truism. We know that all the machines we use, that they are already built in the factory, already built-in obsolescence, that after some point they have to become dysfunctional. We have to buy a new product, we have to buy a new gadget, because after some time it will be defunct. Zondrettel had something more specific, like the people on the streets of Naples, not thinking about, let's say, postmodern technological capitalism, but one of the astonishing things about this essay is that, as he says, this impression that already, if for something to be functional, for something to be functional in a city like Naples or Mediterranean, it already has to be broken down. And then, as he says furthermore in this short essay, it is available also online in English translation. He says, Zonderel says, for them, for the Neapolitan, it is only when things are broken down that they begin to work. Take this, in a way, paradoxical formulation, quite inspiring. So that already, so we have to think of things already broken down for us to be functional. But even more, so if for object or thing or device to be functional, it has already to be broken down, it has already to be obsolete. Zonderel says, and this is almost a kind of nihilist trait of the Neapolitan people he observes in 1926. Zonderel says, and describing even something more extreme, describing car drivers or car traffic in Naples of 26, very much like what I guess many of you experienced just tonight arriving to the museum here in Skopje. He says, describing drivers and car traffic in Naples, he says, with hair-raising verve, the drivers race around in their cars, and if this recklessness does not result in something being smashed up, a wall along the side of the street, or a donkey cart, or even their own car, then it has all been a waste of time. One never really owns something until it has really been knocked around. Otherwise, it is not just worth it. It has to be used and abused, run down until there's practically nothing left of it. So again, it is not just that things have to be already obsolete to become functional. We already have also, in a way, to use or abuse them to be functional. We have to break things to become functional. And I would say you could, from this short essay by Zonderel, as probably you will know, Zonderel then has become quite important for in some discussions. He's been quite many times referenced by someone like Etienne Baliba or Slavoj Žižek, not just them, most especially for his famous treatise on Marxist epistemology on intellectual manual labor. But this short essay on the idea of the broken down is interesting because if we could take up this idea, it is almost in a way kind of similar to what Bertolt Brecht had in mind with his idea of umfunktionieren, refunctioning. There is a specific thing, so it's not just appropriating things, objects, but it's in a way to refunction them. And I take this very short essay by Zonderel, one of the prime examples of what this refunction could be. Again, being aware that things are already obsolete from the factory, from the moment they have been, made. Thing is already a former thing. It has already been obsolete, but even that we have to actively destroy them. And this is this kind of nihilist in a way, nihilist imperative. For the third short, let's say, characteristics of this becoming former, I think Didier Bergman, and I have lectured here on Didier Bergman quite many times in Skopje. By now, just by about 2-3 months ago, many of those books we have been talking about here in those seminars have been now also translated into English. Most prominently, just about 1 month ago, Surveillance des Lucioles, so Survival of the Fireflies, is an amazing book on Pasolini and Agamben, had been published in English, so it's out there in a way for the discussion. And this is a book, as you probably will recall, Didier Bergman tries in a way to, in discussion with Agamben and Pasolini, to define what a new kind of fascism would be, or in a way how fascism, emergence of fascism relates to the notion of light and luminosity. Or the second book also that has been just published in English last year, Eckhort's Bach on the concentration camps of Auschwitz-Birkenau. So I would take from those short essays by Didier Bergman the notion which in a way I would claim extends some of the motives already presented and suggested by Hans here. And also in a way coming to the beginning, this idea of rachachant, of rehashing, researching, or rehashing or reusing as research. And this is a quote from Eckhort's Bach, was the pinnacle of Didier Bergman's argumentation. As you say, there he says, now if you read it out, what I would say, what is the most striking idea that Didier Bergman says, and as you see, he comes to the point that we have to be disciplined in a way, we have to be diligent, we have to come over and over to look at things, we have to be really obsessed with things, with a constant gaze. But what is most striking, and if you take the last sentence of this quote, this is something I think is truly provocative with Didier Bergman, and not just for the context of art historical discussion, but also for broader thing. And this is this idea that if we look not just close enough upon things, but if we constantly look at things, objects, other people, that at some point, as he says, that we see, so we will at some point, at some moment, we will see, so if we look very closely, repetitively upon things, that things will begin to look back at us. So I take this really to be incredible provocation. So it's that if, let's say again, if we are concentrated enough, if we look upon things, then so the consequence of this won't be as much, let's say, our improved intelligence, won't be so much the not kind of knowledge produced by us. So this is not the point. The point for Didier Bergman, he says that at some point those objects will become in a way animated, will become responsive, will become active in the sense that they will begin to look back at us. So I take this to be incredible provocation. So it's in a way idea of how for materialists or for materially meticulous thinkers and intellectuals, that even if it seems that it would be kind of qualitas occulta, that this moment where objects start to look back at us, that there's some, so and this is a motive Didier Bergman develops, again also in context of Walter Benjamin, that this is again paradoxical, that at some point, if you think in materialist way, that at some point objects become alive in the sense that they start to look back at us. They become responsive, and then probably also they become something else than objects. In a way, they create a kind of new responsiveness, new relationality. And so there's also, and this isn't more just a society of subjects and objects, but in a way, objects become something else. So it's also in a way expanding, again, on the notion of what society could be. And the final point I will make with two incredible theorists, Miriam Hanson, the late American film scholar, and Christian Kier, also an American art historian. And there's a notion of comrades, so objects as being mimetic comrades. In her book, Imagine No Possessions, The Socialist Subjects of Russian Constructivism, 2005 by MIT Press, Christiane Kier, so this is the very beginning of a book. She's quoting Alexander Rodchenko from 1925. Rodchenko says, as you see, the light from the east is in the new relation to person, to woman, to things. Our things in our hands must be equals, comrades, and not these black and morphine slaves as they are here. And a book by this incredible monograph by Kier is altogether to show that if you think of objects outside of any property relation, that objects in a way become comrades. So already again, Didier Bergman made this point of that object in a way becomes active if we constantly look upon it. With Kier and talking about the Russian constructivist period of the early 20s and the 1920s, she claims within the book that all those almost every day, so that the imperative of the constructivist Russian epoch, Soviet epoch, was in a way to redefine the object of an object in a way that objects becomes equals and comrades. This would be the point of as Kier states in the book, of the Russian constructivist project, for objects to become truly comrades, not slaves. A point made by Miriam Hanson, again in a book which I would claim is among the most important books, not just on cinema, it is rather a very longish monograph on three theorists, Adorno, Krakow, and Benjamin. And this is probably one of the most important books that have been written, not just on those three thinkers and a critical theory and cinema experience of 2011. Unfortunately, Miriam Hanson is already gone. This is a notion discussing Benjamin's notion of cinema, and as we know, very much like Jean Rettel and his ideal of the things broken down, of how much we know, how much Benjamin's essay on the technological reproducibility had been not just influential within art historian or art historical or cinematic circles, but also as one of the pinnacle articles within the Marxist tradition of technology of modern times. Miriam Hanson proposes that we have to think of, so as she says, you see, so film provides a medium that in a way is twofold. One thing would be this sensory recognition of a self-alienation. I would claim it even more, so it's that this part, so cinema first of all is a medium where we recognize that we are always at odds with capitalism, that we are non-reconciled with capitalism as a regime. But then the other thing I take to be as important as this, that though being always non-reconciled with capitalism and with alienation produced by capitalism, that on the other side, that this insight produces non-destructive mimetic adaptation of technology. This in a way runs counter, again, it's a bit different. So I propose also with Jean Rettel had this almost heroic Neapolitan idea of, Mediterranean idea of breaking things. Miriam Hanson is less provocative in that regard. But what I take to be incredibly inspiring is this notion of mimetic adaptation, non-destructive mimetic adaptation, taken together with being non-reconciled with capitalism. So those two things, being non-reconciled and non-destructive or mimetic, in a way, playing with objects and technology. So what we would have would be, let's say, four things within this kind of poetics of learning, of acquiring things, of apprehending things. Would be fiction, constructing small machines, time machines that in a way would allow us to live in several times at once, notwithstanding and not being obsessed with the notion whether our activities are progressive or regressive. Then the second thing would be built-in obsolescence, to in a way to be engaged with breaking things or in a way to refunctioning them. The third stage with Didier Bergman would be that at some point, if you are meticulous enough, you are concentrated and focused enough, that in a way we see that so-called objects are some new kind of things that in a way are able to interfere, and not just interfere, and to be obstacle for own, let's say, kind of human demands, but in a way that objects at some point become active in their own sense, that objects and things start, those machines in a way start to produce something by their own. And then the notion that we have to embrace this kind of objects, that we have to think of them as comrades, as equals, on equal footing with us. In a way that also that they are kind of machines that allow us to be both non-reconcilable of what capitalism is, but then also being able to be non-destructive in a sense that make us able to adapt to some new things or to propose new things. And I will end by motive. There is I have got in I started already with Bartleby and with Herman Melville, and as you will know, within the art circles and philosophical circles of the last three decades, the figure of Bartleby the scrivener, this mythic and reclusive figure proposed by and written out by Melville, you will know that the famous formula, again, this is also form, forma, formula, formulation. I prefer not to. Deleuze has written incredible essay on it. Then many people from Agamben and many others have taken up this formula of I prefer not to, as being the most concise and in a way the most elegant formula of how to articulate. This is very kind of refusal, creative refusal. I prefer not to. And as you probably will recall, Deleuze in his article on Bartleby, Deleuze even claims that Bartleby is a figure that is comparable, or that Bartleby as a literary figure in a way is a point, is a trigger, is a kind of a historical fact. So Bartleby as a figure is a historical fact that in a way triggers, or in a way resembles of what for Deleuze, as Deleuze says, is the new humanity of either the American people or the Soviet communism. So, okay, this I will say is a rather pathetic, or at least in intellectual not fiction, but construction, that some literary figure would in a way trigger some specific consequence of that magnitude, as Deleuze says that in a way, so that Bartleby would be the starting point of a new kind of humanity. But again, I take it as at least from a propaedeutical things, interesting and important and provocative. So I would say that, and I will end with this, that Imre Kertész, so the late Hungarian Nobel Prize winner for literature, as you know, has written this incredible novel, Faithlessness, on the camps. There's an incredible short story by him, The Union Jack, so like Union Jack, like the British flag, 1991. And he talks there about a real figure, about Ernest Sepp, famous quotidian, so it's a journalist and a writer from Hungary, from in between the two wars and later on. And as Kertész says, and on one or two occasions, I was even introduced to Ernest Sepp purely for the sake of being able to hear him introduce himself with a phrase that has since attained legendary and mythical status. I was Ernest Sepp. And then, so it's Ernest Sepp, as in the quote on the screen, you see a formulation, as Kertész goes on, a formulation which lures nobody towards anything, but with which nobody can ever be reconciled. And by that token of formulation with a far-reaching resonance. I guess, so my claim would be that, in a way, that after Bartleby and Melville, that Kert has produced a figure of almost of the same magnitude, importance as Bartleby, Ernest Sepp, who introduces himself. I was Ernest Sepp. Very specific kind of introducing oneself, a very specific formulation where you claim that what you are is the person who you already were. So this, if I would now just make a couple of sentences to end my presentation, what for me would be interesting is within the notion of acquiring knowledge. In Little Ernestino at the beginning, he says, rachachant, rehashing, reusing, refunctioning, recycling. It would mean, in the wake of Rancière, to construct some small fictions, almost in the sense of Kafka or Borges. Small fictions. Those fictions, in a way, would be fictions of adaptation, of breaking things down. Would be also fictions of objects starting to become something else, expanding our notion of what society is. Society that it isn't anymore just a society of people and humans, but also of technological temporality that can interfere, or probably interferes a lot in what we think a society are. And then at the point also then to make this society in an expanded sense, to make it one of comrades, as Christian here citing Rodchenko has proposed. That those things or those knowledges we inquire, that they are that the effect they produce is becoming comrades, but in a very radical sense again, of not producing new things, not producing new knowledges, but rather, as little Ernestino wants to know just things he already knows, or like Ernest Sepp wants just to be someone who already was, in a way to produce new kind of, not new kind of things, but in a way to produce things that operate on a different level. Actually, we don't have to think of whether we are progressives or regressives, but in a way just live this fiction of being able to live at several times at once. So with this rather sketchy proposition, I will end my talk.
But multi-layer thinking.
I would like to make a certain connection between Ivo Andrić and Imre Kertész, because Ivo Andrić says that when the objects stay in the same place for a long time, they obtain this incredible aura of the death of time, actually of the death itself, that not everything lasts forever. So he's like saying that that objects are starving for spirituality, and on the other hand, Imre Kertész is telling us how people are starving for food. Like when he was in his autobiographical prose, he says that when he was in a convent, because his father gave him there, every day he was eating this poor soup from cabbage in which were floating through a few particles of the sausage. And anyway, the soup itself and those particles and everything, they're also objects. They're not human, but anyway, I think this is a kind of a example of a duality of the starving. So, did you actually found this linkage? And I think that I could add here another example that, for example, Erika Jong says that film, although it's the closest art of all arts to the human life, cannot catch the wholeness of the life because cannot reproduce the sense of starvation.
Thank you. I will answer you by explaining it. So it's what I would think is that in the last 10 years, within a specific theoretical framework, we have begun. So we have started talking about objects, life or objects, objectivity, and in some sense, at some point, it has become known as so-called speculative realism, where in a sense, the claim of this, if we, just make it really very short, the claim would be that we have to think of beyond the subject-object relation, and that there is some autonomy of objects that make objects, or say things, animated. And so within this discussion, I would say, I deem it as important. Then if we want to think, what interested me is how to stay true, how to stay fidel, so how to be truthful to the material you encounter. Everyday objects, art objects, whatever objects, or people also. How you stay true to those experiences. And if you are a materialist, intellectual thinker, artist, you will say, okay, those objects, they have specific autonomy, which goes beyond my mind, consciousness, my mind. They have autonomy. And my imperative within what I presented you was to sketch a kind of provisional poetics within 4 features of what this kind of materialist poetics could be, of being in engaging with objects, with technologies, and maybe you will know that within especially also within the, let's say, the tradition of so-called Italian biopolitical theory, but not just exclusive to it. There was one specific person, artist, who was the prime example of such a thing. It was Glenn Gould, and Glenn Gould, as an artist, most famous pianist of his time, who at some point has disbanded performing live, just then being in the studio performing and recording quite many famous recordings. So, and then it was Paolo Virno who proposed a notion which in a way is also supplemented by something which Maurizio Lazzarato has developed, so the notion of immaterial labor. So Virno has introduced the notion of virtuosism, as a kind of non-destructive way of engaging with objects, with skills, with knowledges. So, I was interested, what I presented you, a bit different to it. I was interested in less to engage with this notion of immaterial or virtuosic. But it is quite also attached to this idea that at some point within this very specific engagement with material things, something immaterial happens. And my idea was to, in a way, to expand this grammar of immateriality. You could say it is spirituality, you could say. So, you know, so this would be the idea of
in a sense that the objects have some kind of a soul. Like, for example, the chairs in this cinema, they're very old, and I was here in this same cinema like 30 years ago. And like each time I come here, I have an impression that they're waiting to come here.
Again, but
everything else is restored, but these chairs are really old.
So my point again would be yes, but then I mean to take it not from a, let's say, kind of any spiritualist or in a way idealist tradition, but to try to come what in a way immaterial labor or immaterial or virtuosic labor would be, what it would be, so that we don't leave this notion of, let's say, spirituality or immateriality to something just being new and kind of idealism. What interested me in this sense, what's such kind of activities, as I have laid you in front of you, what does it produce? And I think it produces something. So let's say for Rancière, fiction, it does produce something. It does produce something. So what, in a way, I was again interested in what it does produce. And now coming back to, I mean, with Ivo Andrić, thank you very much. This is a great example with Imre Kertész. So this formula is that what do you produce when you say to someone that you are a former someone? I was Ernest. What does it mean? Like also with Glenn Gould, what does it say? You know, I'm a pianist, but in a way I'm a former pianist who performs live. So this refusal. So this is what interests me in a way. This kind of refusal, being non-reconciled to what we are living. Let's say capitalism, but then also in a way of how not to be just nihilist and then to say, okay, this is a total refusal which has no potential for being emancipatory at all. Yeah, again, it's coming.
So in this case, those objects are totems, not relics. These objects in this case, if we put it this way, the objects are totems, but not relics.
Totems, you know, I mean, totems like this would already mean that they are in a way that they are holy in a way that it's sacred. What I would rather say that.
But they don't have power like relics.
No, they have.
You have to go on a bit. If you finish with your question.
Yes, of course.
If there is some other questions, yes.
I was somehow struck by the last sentence of your talk where you were saying that, and you said this several times in the talk, that it's not about being progressive or regressive, and that it's about, following Rancière, living at several times at once. And I understand this in the context of your talk in terms of kind of poetics, but I would be curious because in the beginning of your talk you said that you are someone also active politically as an activist. And so I would be curious, like, what would this mean to you politically? Because for me somehow it resonated very much with the current political discussions, about being progressive, regressive, and then what would an imagination around living at several times at once be in terms of political strategy, or I don't exactly know what to call it. I was just kind of struck and excited by this notion.
I will tell you right away. So yesterday I was telling, and I was looking up for this reference of Maurizio Lazzarato. This is from his book, Political Experimentations, last year translated into English. I have tried to come up with this footnote I was thinking of, I'm obsessed with. I haven't found it. Okay, now come to Rancière. So it has some point with you. You will now reckon. There is an ignorant schoolmaster by Rancière in the 3rd chapter, or in 4th chapter. Rancière at some point says, you know, the wise man behaves as if the society does not exist. And you know, I'm always, since then, I'm struck by it. So what does it mean that the wise man obsessed with emancipation? So if you are about emancipation, Rancière proposes that if you're into thinking of emancipation, that you have to behave like the society does not exist. And my point would be, okay, does it mean that Rancière, almost like Foucault, sidelines with neoliberals who would claim that society doesn't exist, or that society is not a prime example of emancipation, that society is not a medium of emancipation? This was one thing, so this would be, let's say, I guess for me, a provocation. Almost something like another, in a way, he's not a forgotten figure, but he's in a way a marginal figure, though quite important within some Parisian circles, Sylvain Lazarus, the anthropologist. Sylvain, who, as probably you will know by you in his politics, he says, if there is one thing which is the basic, the tenet of my political thinking, this is the notion by Lazarus, the formula, people think, les gens pensent. So this is the only thing in a way you should know about politics. People think that there is some kind of indestructible force, emancipatory force that people think, les gens. So it's not even people, but persons think that is indestructible. In one of his books about 1968, Lazarus says, and even going beyond, so it's not just about, for him, being a kind of a former Maoist, it's not just about anti-state. So that politics is not just about being anti-state or outside of state. But Lazarus, almost like Rancière, makes a point that politics is also anti-society. So okay, so I would say, so this is what, so those provocations are interesting for me. With Rancière, Lazarus, for example, or I would say also another thing with Virno, with Lazzarato or Negri, is the notion of politics which in a way is anti-state, or maybe even anti-state and anti-social. So it's in a way just to put all those categories in brackets and to let this provocation resound. So this is what interests me. So this kind of imagination or sensibility that we put both state and society as media of politics aside, and then in a way to construe those kind of fictions. So that's it. So this was my personal, or is my personal claim. And not, let's say, as being in a way progressives, to say, we have then to recapture we have then to recapture neoliberal. So in a way, if from Margaret Thatcher on, neoliberal says society does not exist, or just families, as she says, that our point would be ecological one. In a way, ecological one, in the sense that we say, no, you are fooled, or you are wrong. Society does exist. I would rather claim, and this is, let's say, my impetus behind everything I presented, that we have to take up this notion that society does not exist, or at least does not exist as a prime medium of emancipation. This is what interests me, and let's say Rancière has written something about it, and some of those people. What interested me there was to connect it. What can we learn from such a proposition that the society does not exist, or at least not as a prime example of emancipation, and maybe even that state does not exist in a way that our goal is not kind of a Leninist one to capture the state, and then in a way to as it were, yeah. So this would be my answer to it.
When you try to make equivalence with the object, you say that from a Rancièrean point, it's out of discourse, but objects do belong in discourses. So when you make equivalence or identification, you have to consider the discourses that object belongs. So you actually identify with different things. You cannot separate the object from the places that it belongs. It doesn't matter if it's about text or art piece or...
Yeah, so, I'd say, I agree in a sense, so if you take, let's say, the pragmatics of what you said. So of course, discourses, they have words, they have not just a meaning, but they have a material consequence. And this material consequence, then let's say for Foucault, in this notion of genealogical knowledge, is that discourse is in a way cut. They cut, they produce new things, they produce, or they separate things. So it's, discourses are not innocent, so they are operational. So they produce something which is not just discursive, it's extra discursive. Again, I was, I would take it to be let's say, the basic premise. But then, you know, I would say, and there Didier Bergman, as a very specific and very prolific theorist, is of interest of me, that at some point those consequences, for example, that have been produced also by discourses, by words uttered, that those consequences are or gain also some autonomy. And they, at some point, they start to function by themselves. Agency, agency. And again, for me, it would be interesting, or is interesting, since we know that also this discourse on agency, objects, not just about speculative realism, but also some people like Bruno Latour and sociology of actor network theories, that has also become quite known in art circles within the last decade, to in a way to recapture it, and not just to make it as kind of neutral as maybe some of those theories would like to be. To recapture it in a way for this is not just Marxist emancipatory tradition, but let's say for emancipatory tradition. So to construe another kind of agency, you could maybe call it spirituality, intellectuality. So probably the closest term, for example, by Virno used is mass intellectuality. You know, I would be interested, I'm trying in a way to think of what this mass intellectuality is. And okay, as you have seen, I used all the examples I've seen are coming from arts. So they're not, but what I think in those examples that I've presented to you is interesting, that there's this specific notion of technology, of dealing with also the technological object, which is so interesting to me. So it's, and also the kind of ethos of not trying to be in a way, not to go, as I told now to the other person, if neoliberal says this society does not exist, not to defend society, but in a way to be ultra, in a way to think, so this provocation through. And so let's say, so this is my guess. So rather than argument, so.
I have one question, one comment or question more. If there is, okay, sorry, no, please.
Before I just make my major comment I had in mind, to be honest, I have never understood the insistence on the notion of immaterial labor, except by linking it strictly and giving continuous priority to what materialism is understood to be exclusively in the frameworks of historical materialism. So there is no immaterial labor. Affective and cognitive labor is not immaterial. It is actually very material because it includes embodied processes. And today's achievement and success subjects which are being produced by neoliberal capitalism and the effects of exhaustion actually are the most evident symptom of the embodiment and materiality of that labor. But that's just a terminological discussion, and the insistence of Marxist visions of materialism, something that Levi Bryant, for example, has criticized in his last work. I just wanted to make a comment actually in the direction of maybe expanding your list of thinking these questions with a different canon that comes maybe from feminist and queer theory. And especially because these subjects that you've been talking about have been pretty much, the queer theories have been pretty much interested in the past few years. For example, Heather Love has been talking about looking backwards, using the myth of Orpheus, but especially in terms of some sort of backward affective politics, which resist normative or refuses the normative frameworks of the present and the demands for affective tuning in relation to the normative demands of the present. Also, Jose Esteban Munoz has been talking about the utopian potentials of looking backwards or looking in the past. Sarah Ahmed has been talking about the melancholic migrant as a politics of refusal to adapt, to accommodate, to acculturate to the hegemonic host society, for example, the English host society, and the treatment of migrants, and how melancholic migrant subjects are treated in mainstream cinema, for example, how they are being normalized with these affective politics. So, yeah, I mean, this was great. It was like mind-whirling what you've been talking about. I would just, I wanted to share that this affective politics in terms of forwardness, backwardness, and different temporalities that in a way cut through the present, and by sticking to the past, maybe becoming some sort of a stubborn subjects or stuck subjects in the past, actually open possibilities for rethinking politics, thinking histories, on the one, histories of oppression, for example, which might be neglected easily by the insistence of progress and looking forward, looking toward the future, but on the other side, it might give us potential to think otherwise, not in strictly nostalgic terms, but also contemporary phenomena of nostalgia. For example, nostalgia can bring us back to this topic, how looking backwards brings certain utopian potentials with it in relation to the present. So, just like directions, further directions of thinking.
Thank you. For example, I will end up, I'm quite happy within the 10-day period, the first text, a small booklet essay by another prominent queer theorist, Lee Edelman, has been published by us in Zagreb. It's called Learning Nothing. But I also would say is interesting in that regard, and as yesterday Mauricio was right to say that Marxism, at least we know what is called itself Marxism, is oblivious of, can't deal with the notion of the feminine and of the colonized or decolonized. What I think is so important, for example, with someone like Lee Edelman, is also again this intuition, or as he proposes, that if we want to think a queer movement, as being emancipatory, that it has to go beyond notion of a family or future, and then he'll say, so it's no kids, no future. And I would say that what was interesting for me, example, coming for example to Deleuze and Bartleby. Deleuze, there is still, you have the sense that Bartleby, even if it's kind of a mythical literary figure, is a starting point of a new, he's starting a new generation of Soviet communists, of American Republicans. Already Agamben, in his treatment of the very same essay, Agamben there, so this is probably one of the most speculative texts by Agamben. It's on Deleuze's, on Melville's Bartleby. The Agamben, I guess, not for the first time, but there Agamben in that sense, in that essay, makes a claim that everything he is about is a different temporality, is a kind of almost kind of cyclical temporality. So what I would say is, would interest me, can we think creativity or social, so a communal creativity, or creating things in community and commune things in community, whether we can think it outside of also of a notion of reproduction, so that it doesn't have to be embedded, at least for the sake of our own thinking at the very initial stage, with the notion, for example, of reproduction, be it sexual, societal, and whatever. So this is, let's say, for me, always kind of, is a rather a provocation, but which opens up again then maybe some other context.
Okay, I think that we are running out of time. We have one more lecture. Thank you, Petar, for these comprehensive thoughts and for forcing us to become at the same time former, present, and future. Thank you.